Hi, everybody.
I'll clap for you, Robin.
Thank you, Darren. And I will clap for you. Hi, Darren.
Hi there.
I just wanted to say that Darren and I met because I was such a huge fan of Melrose Place. And I just remember when Kimberly took off her wig to reveal her scarred, bald head, I just crossed over from being a fan to being obsessed, which I told Darren. And I was not the only one who was obsessed. And you've had a billion monster hits, starting with 90210, Melrose Place, Sex and the City, Younger, and now Emily in Paris, which was a gigantic international hit on Netflix. And these shows have truly become part of the zeitgeist. So the first thing I want to ask you is, when you're thinking about a new show, do you think about the audience and what the audience might want to see, or is it just more what you're interested in yourself?
I mean, I think of it as, first I do think of myself. I think of what's going to entertain me. I think you have to entertain yourself first. I think it's a mistake to sort of think about what's an audience going to like, because I think you first have to think about what are you going to like and what are you drawn to, and what's for me, it's like what's entertaining to me about doing a show, and why is it going to entertain me?
What's so interesting is that what entertains you entertains so many people.
But I think that goes for anybody. I feel like on some level we're all the same. We want to be entertained by compelling stories and characters, and those kind of come in all sorts of flavors. So I think when a show is when you're successful at entertaining yourself, I think it translates. And I've done shows that haven't entertained me, and those haven't worked. So in some cases,
all the shows that have worked have entertained you.
Yeah, totally. I think when you're working on a show where you're working in a room of writers and you're laughing and having a good time, that is a really good sign that something's working. And when you're just kind of like, when nobody's happy and you can feel like a show that's just not happening, when you feel like your writing team just isn't having fun in the room. And it doesn't have to be a comedy to have fun.
But do you encourage people to tell personal stories, and is it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's happened. I feel like certainly beginning with 90210 had some personal stories, I think, but certainly beginning with Sex and the City, that was a very important part of the storytelling, is to try to find always the kernel of truth in the stories that we're telling, that they didn't all have to come from writers' experiences, but it was great when we were able to find those moments that a writer could connect to, or that came out of personal experiences, because there's always truth to that.
When Sex and the City came on, I remember a big show was Ally McBeal. And it was this whole other thing where it was like, I'm going to wait around for my, soulmate and my perfect love. And I just thought it was so disgusting. And then Sex and the City came on, and it was like all the women that I knew, who were running around having casual sex and talking about sex in a very frank way. Did you consciously think about bucking the trend when you did that show?
Yeah, at the time that I did Sex and the City, it was coming off of 90210, Melrose Place, and I'd done a big show for CBS, sort of a big flop, Central Park West, that didn't work, but it was a show that got a lot of hype, and we did it for 22 episodes, and it was kind of exhausting to try to kind of pull the show around to sort of, the network wanted one thing, then they wanted another. And it was just like, it was such a perfect example of how networks destroy shows, because the whole regime changed from the time I went in to start it to throughout production. So it became a show about young people wanting to sort of, young glamorous Manhattan show, which is what I wanted to do, which was great because it brought me to New York. And I always think of Central Park West as a bit of a dress rehearsal for Sex and the City, but it was about a young cast that worked, a young group of people that worked at a magazine like Vanity Fair. And by the end of the series, the show was basically starring Raquel Welch, Gerald McCraney, and Lauren Hutton were the stars. So it was not a great experience, and kind of after that, I thought, I really wanted to do something that was not about network television. I'd done a lot, and I had an opportunity to do sort of what I wanted to do and do something more personal. So I thought of Sex and the City in a way as sort of like an independent film for television. And at the time, HBO was not the place you thought of for going to do a TV series. Of course, now you think it's the premier place to do a series, but at the time, there was maybe one or two shows. Larry Sanders Show, which was great.
Sanders, but it was really Sex and the City and
Sopranos. Yeah, and Sopranos came the year after us. But for me, it was about just doing something that gave me a lot of creative freedom and was able to do a very non-network show.
Did being on HBO, did they encourage you to push the envelope and shock people as much as you could?
Well, I don't think we were looking to shock people. And I think it was about not necessarily about pushing the envelope, but just basically being able to tell frank, truthful stories about sex and relationships. And just that alone had just not been done on television. It had been done on film. It wasn't even being done in the movies. Romantic comedies were getting very soft, and they used to be edgy.
And from the female point of view either, not like that.
Right. So this did have a point of view it was sex and relationships from a female point of view. And I think having that point of view made it funny instead of smarmy. I think we've all seen guys sit around and talk about sex, and it's not fun, it's not funny, but to see women do it we were able to get away with a lot more than I think had it been a bunch of guys sort of objectifying women. But we've seen that, forever. So this was about women objectifying men and having fun with that.
Yeah, and you just hadn't seen it and hadn't seen the kind of conversations that you wrote for the women, which in addition to all the sex stuff, I think the stuff people really remember is the relationship.
Yeah. I think the thing to me that's really gratifying about Sex and the City is that it really became most successful in syndication, where they cut out all the sex stuff. So people really fell in love with the show. The majority of the audience found the show in syndication, and they love the show because they love the characters. And if you watch it on E, or you watch it when it was on cable, it lost a lot of the edge it had on HBO, but what it still had were the characters and relationships. And at its core, that's why the show was successful. It wasn't because, of the language. I mean, all that was new, but that's not what really made the show successful, I think.
But when they first said you were going to have to cut all that stuff out, what was your reaction to that? Were you?
My reaction was I wanted no part of it. And I just couldn't imagine how they were going to do it. And quite honestly, I've really never seen the show in syndication. It's just not the show that I made. And it's at that point, it's a product, and it's their product. They can do with it what they like. But I've never watched it.
Yeah, it seems like it would be really hard when you set out to do something and accomplished what you were setting out to do to see it butchered. I want to talk about Emily in Paris for a minute. If there is such a thing as a Darren Star show, it feels like a Darren Star show. There's this city at the center of it, and Paris is this magical city, and the great soundtrack with all the French music. And I went back and watched the pilot of Sex and the City, and there's the indelible opening of Sex and the City and the Pat Field wardrobe. But are there any elements that you consciously put in all your shows, or?
Well, I definitely brought Pat Field to Emily in Paris, and to me, Emily in Paris and Sex and the City are two very, very different shows. I think on the surface, people are it's easy to say, oh, it's Sex and the City in Paris. It's definitely not. It came from a whole different place, and a desire to want to do a show about somebody having this expatriate experience in a foreign country. That's not Sex and the City at all. But I think that it has the trappings of Sex and the City. It's glamorous, and Paris is a glamorous romantic city in the same way that New York was made to look like a glamorous romantic city. And with Pat Field doing the wardrobe, there's something very over the top about the look of the show that is entertaining. And I think she's kind of a genius at what she does.
Yes, a genius. That yellow dress. That's all I'm going to say is the yellow dress with the black belt. It just sticks in your mind. And the great wardrobe that she had for the fashion show in the last episode.
And Robin, for those who don't know, Robin worked on the show with me.
I did.
And spent time in Paris.
I did. In fact, I wanted to share. May I share the little behind the scenes?
Sure.
What's that? I ran this by you, Darren.
Oh, yes. Okay, now I know.
Well, so this is, if you think that, if you have a fantasy of what it's like to work on a Darren Star show in France, it may go a little something like this. And hopefully I can get this to work.
Once you show this, I'll give some context to it also.
So this is the woman on the right is Sarah Choi, who was the writer's assistant, and on the left is Grant Sloss. I think Grant wrote this episode, and this was on location at the wine
in the Loire Valley.
In the Loire Valley for Champagne. So these are the writer's assistant and the writer hard at work.
Yes, we're lucky with the weather. I think we didn't have any problem. Yeah.
They caught me filming them. Yes, Darren? I just want to, can I show one more thing really quick?
Sure. Have I seen this one?
Yes. This is the writers. So you don't feel bad for the writers. This is the writers later that day. And then I don't have anything else to share. So they're sampling a little bit of the wine while they're writing. It wasn't at all the time.
To give that moment some context, not to make it seem like we spent all of our time drinking wine, or that I spent all of my time drinking wine while the writers toiled next to me. We were at a winery, and that gentleman it was his winery. He wanted us to try his wine.
And we're taking shots. It would have been rude not to.
It would have been very rude not to. And it probably was like 11 in the morning or something like that. So we drank a lot of wine during that shoot. And I can remember we were trying to figure out, we were weeks away from shooting those last couple episodes that had not been really broken yet. So that was like, that was one little moment between a lot of panic and that sip of wine.
Panic and stress. There's a lot of writers listening, and I'm sure that they can relate.
I would say that the panic and stress doesn't really ever just go away.
So after all the episodes of series and all the series you've done, you still get stressed out, and you still find you hit a wall. And is it like every time you do it, starting fresh?
Well, you were there, so I'm sure you can answer that question. Yes, it is. You do sort of like, at least for me, I do feel like every show is like a new animal, and it does. I mean, you'd certainly through experience have some tools at your disposal as a writer, but at the same time, you like want to do something really good, and it's not it's not something that is cookie cutter, writing a show. And it's like every show, it has to feel as original as you can make it. And so I do feel like you're in the dark with every series and just sort of feeling your way through. I think it gets better after the first season and the second season, and characters get established. But I think the first season of a show, of any show I've done, is always is really tough. And that's why the toughest shows are the failures, the ones that you've done for an entire season and they don't get renewed, because by the end of that season, you've done all that, you've done so much heavy lifting. So it's really always like a bummer when a show doesn't get picked up, when you've kind of gotten through like a lot of the hurdles of a first year.
I remember the first season of Melrose Place. It felt like the show had almost like a mid-course correction. Am I correct about that?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Can you talk about that for a minute? Because I could not remember a show that had actually been able to make a mid-course correction and then work.
Well, that mid-course correction was really out of a lot of desperation. I mean, Melrose Place was a really, really super hyped show, and it didn't have a pilot. I mean, it had a pilot script, but we just went right into the series. It did make a mid-course correction, because at the beginning it started off as a spin-off of 90210, and it was kind of hampered in a way because of its connection to 90210. I mean, I kind of conceived Melrose Place as its own series and pitched it, and then that's how and they wanted a 90210 spin-off, so it kind of was like this Frankenstein creation of how to make this show a spin-off with 90210. That really it didn't belong together, and it took a while to kind of like sort of move away from that sort of earnest 90210 vibe into the show about adults. And
it totally felt like.
Yes, and I think that it took the network a while for them to let me know that I could basically, 90210, we basically were, I got a little terrorized by the network, because there was a lot of teenage sex in the first season of 90210 that we kind of had to really pay for later on, and they felt that we'd gone too far. So I was very like skittish about the sexuality, the characters on Melrose Place, really kind of behaving and acting like the adults they were. It took a while for us all to agree, okay, this show is going to be a lot racier than 90210. And
I remember the almost gay kiss on Melrose.
Yes, that was late. Yeah, that was later. Yeah, that was down the road, right?
But that was it was so outrageous that you even got to do two gay characters in a nighttime.
Well, actually, we actually filmed the gay kiss between Doug Savant, Matt, and Billy's best man. And Billy saw that. It was a surprise to see that his best friend, he didn't know that about his best friend. He sees him kissing Matt in the courtyard, and we filmed it. And, the network said that we couldn't do it. And I said, well, we're going to shoot it, and it's up to you guys whether you're going to cut it or not. And I kind of didn't know until it aired what they were going to do, because I gave them the unedited version with the kiss, hoping that they would actually have the guts to air it, but they didn't. They cut it, which just shows you what a different time that was. But we did course correct. We brought in Heather Locklear, which for me, her persona gave me the freedom and to just go wild, because she couldn't really she could not say hello without an ulterior motive. And I just loved that about her, and it really kind of inspired me. Once her character came in, we didn't have an antagonist in the show. We had a lot of nice people, and then everybody got a lot less nice when she came on. But the other thing that gave us, we had, the ability to do that, was that we had time. I mean, it's hard to imagine now, but the first season of Melrose Place was 35 episodes.
Is that all?
35 hours. Yes, in the first season.
And now it's like 10 episodes.
I know. Yeah. So it was really like almost 2 full seasons.
Wow.
in one. Yeah.
That's insane. And you still had to rethink the show during that. That's amazing.
And then we basically did 32 to 34 episodes a season after that, because Fox didn't want any reruns. So in order to do that, for a number of months, we would shoot with 2 crews simultaneously and be filming 2 episodes at the same time. That was the only way to kind of do it. So
Oh my
it was
God.
like, yeah.
How, when you got 90210 on, what had you done prior to that?
So I had sold a screenplay when I was in my like around 25 to Warner Brothers. That was just out of the blue, surprising to me that it sold. I went in to pitch it with some producers I had met and developed this idea for them. And I'd written a treatment, and Mark Canton at the time was the VP over there. I remember when Lisa Henson was his assistant. For any of those people, any of you guys that remember those people, they're still active in the business and super talented and super smart, because they said yes, and and to really my complete surprise, they hired me to they hired me to write the script and gave me a deal to write this script for this movie called Doing Time on Planet Earth, which eventually got made. Not at Canon Pictures, not the way I imagined it would be, but it started got me an agent, and I was able to sort of like become a full-time writer. And I wrote screenplays in my 20s for a number of studios, very teenage-oriented films. And I wrote a movie called If Looks Could Kill, that was this teenage James Bond movie with Richard Grieco.
Oh, yeah.
Very miscast Richard Grieco, but the scripts got the got me a meeting at Fox about it came to the attention of Fox. They approached me about doing a show in high school, and they put me together there in spelling. And I felt that I had not seen a show in high school that was relevant at all to the audience in the way that, let's say, the John Hughes movies were. And the one show I liked at the time on television was 30 something. And I basically said I wanted to do a much more relevant show about teenagers in high school that would be more like The Breakfast Club, like the John Hughes films, more like 30 something, in the sense that it's all about examining the lives of everything that's important to these kids. And it's about they're solving their own problems. It's not about parents. It's not about teachers. And it's also going to have a lot more sex and edge, because there wasn't anything on television that was really like talking about teenagers in any kind of that acknowledged that they were having sex in high school, that acknowledged they were doing drugs. There was nothing really like that wasn't or doing that in an extremely judgmental way.
Right. Rather than portraying kids how they
Portraying just how life was. Yeah.
Are you surprised that that kids still watch it?
I think a lot of it is that, the cast was amazing. I think when you have a cast that has the kind of chemistry that that cast did.
I went back and I watched the pilot yesterday, and they were.
Oh, did you really? Wow.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I think I haven't seen it for a long time, but I think that like there's something very classic about that cast. I mean, I was even thinking when we did it, it felt like, there was something very Rebel Without a Cause about, Luke Perry, the whole feeling of it felt there's just kind of something a little bit, it was modern and classic at the same time. And I think people, when you have a cast that works that well, that has that kind of chemistry, it's always, there's something timeless about it. So I'm sure it's very, very dated, but I think there's something timeless about seeing them react.
The wardrobe and the hair and all that is so much
Sure.
fun to look at. But,
Yeah.
I will admit, I watched the second one too. It's so old, and yeah, it's, the look of it is dated, but it's still fun storytelling. And it was so much fun to look at those. They were so young and so adorable. When you're working on a new project, how much time do you spend developing the characters, and at what point do you start thinking about story?
I think about the characters first, and that to me is like by far the most important thing, is thinking about who are the characters, and then from there thinking about the story and how the characters motivate the action. I mean, with 90210, I had a premise that was based, my premise was that this family is a fish out of water. This brother and sister from the Midwest moved to Beverly Hills, but that's still starting with characters. So then it's like, and then so the question is, who are the characters are going to encounter that they come up against that change them in the same way that change them, and that they have an effect on those characters have an effect on them, and how, and you know, and I think in a way you can draw a line between, not that it's a formula, but Emily in Paris is the same thing. She's a fish out of water in Paris. She is coming into a new culture that she doesn't understand, and she brings her own sense of American culture that they like or they don't like, but it affects them, and they also, and their culture affects her.
Well, and it's very similar when you talk about it that way too, to what you do in Younger. You know, again, you bring the outsider in, and
Right. Younger's definitely, yes. And Younger's definitely a fish out of water story. But, you know, and all these shows for me, in order for me to connect to a show, it has to have something personal in terms of what I want to discover, what I want to learn, what I want to say. You know, with Younger, it was very much about, it's based on a book. And I love the premise about a woman who lies about her age because she has to in order to get back into the workforce. And I had a lot of female friends who raised families and then couldn't, wanted to get back into their jobs in Hollywood, and basically found themselves like, quickly kind of, irrelevant, or, after 10 years, you're just not like, nobody really wants to hire you again. It doesn't matter how smart you are. So I knew those women, and at the same time, I was suddenly the older generation after having been like the young guy for so long. Then suddenly I'm like the older generation looking at this younger generation, wondering who are these millennials. So I was able to very much put myself in the shoes of Liza and imagine, swimming in those waters and how confusing it could be. And because it's something I was actually going through and thinking about myself. And I got to work in a room with really terrific, talented young writers. And I think it was a mix of a lot of different ages. And I think we both had a good time sort of like, in a way, learning from each other.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to ask you, since you brought up the writers, is when you put together a writer's room, do you have a guiding principle? What is it that you're looking for when you're building a writer's room?
I mean, first and foremost, I look at scripts. I'm looking at the script before I'm meeting the person. And so that's really super important to me, is I like the script, I like the writing. And, I feel like most everybody can function in a room together. And I think it's about, so for me, it's like the writing is primary. The writing is key. And, it's hard to know, meeting somebody from the beginning, how they're going to be in a room. I mean, it's like kind of everybody is putting their, you can't really tell. Some people can be more outgoing in a meeting, and some are more reticent, but it doesn't really mean that they're not going to be good in a room. And so it's really like, personality wise, that's hard to tell from a first meeting. A lot of it is like,
is there anything somebody
taking a chance?
Not do?
What's that?
Is there anything somebody should just not do in a meeting?
I think the only thing not to do is to be like, is to be too quiet. I think that's what you don't want. I think you don't, I'm looking for people who kind of like are courageous in a room about what they have to say, that that really want to defend their position, that aren't afraid to do it, but also are going to be able to like hear another side. But I think it's really important that a writer has a strong attitude about the story they want to tell, or about the characters and the show.
You also do a really wonderful thing, which is that you develop and you promote your writer's assistants. Is there anything like, how does somebody get a job as a writer's assistant, and what do you look for in a writer's assistant that makes you think, well, this person may be able to write?
I think it's always, to me, I'm with younger, it's been like, I feel like I've been incredibly lucky to have, first of all, such terrific writers assistants who then developed into such wonderful writers. Um, I I don't know that that always happens. I think being a writer's assistant is the hardest job there is. I mean, I couldn't do it. I could not sit there and the level of focus and concentration it takes to take notes that quickly and then organize them. And it's really it's really an amazing skill. And I think that good writers assistants have a good sense of what the story is and what's important. And because of that, they're just constantly like, they're developing this sense of story, this ear for dialogue. And I think they're they're able to kind of make that leap into writing a script. But they're two very different skills, and I certainly, not sure that I could have. I'm not sure I would have been a good writer's assistant. I'm not sure.
I think I would have been a good one.
You would have, yeah. Well, I think it's a very,
I just
very
sit at the keyboard. I like, but I would have, no, I might
yeah.
not have been a good
I'm
one.
really, really impressed by good writers assistants. I think um, it's a really tough job and a really super, super important job. And I didn't used to have that, you know, in the past. I didn't really have really good writer's assistants. I was more used to taking my own notes. And I think that's something
You know,
that to me is a little bit new in the past 10 years, the idea of having a really good writer assistant who's putting out really good notes.
And so would they organize the notes overnight? Is that what the good notes are?
Yeah, they organize the notes. They are, absolutely. And they also are just sort of, getting those important things. I mean, I will always make sure to say sometimes that's important and talking about when we're talking about things, but it's generally something I don't have to do because they get it all, anyway.
The advantage of hiring those people too is that they've now been in your room for a couple years, so they can get your voice, because that's really the job of the staff, is to get your voice. And I know that you're using a lot of your writers from younger on Emily in Paris, which is, it's wonderful to be able to find people who are.
Yeah, it's wonderful for me to find writers that I know can deliver, that have a great sense of story, and that also just sort of like, I think the voice of the show becomes eventually it becomes the voice of the room, and I think it really does. I think everybody, it's all additive over time, which I think makes the show better.
Did you do any research before you wrote Emily in Paris? You said the whole idea was you wanted to write about an expat
Yeah,
experience.
I mean, I've been spending time in Paris since I was 19, just backpacking through Europe. I really fell in love with Paris, and I'd go back as often as I could. Um, but I did move there for a period of time, for about a month at one point, and took language classes myself, and just sort of imagined what it would be like to like live in the city, not as a tourist, to have an apartment, to go through some of the the struggles of being in Paris and not speaking French very well, and like not being a tourist. And I interviewed I spent time at a marketing firm in Paris, and I interviewed people in the beauty industries and different, businesses that I thought that we might come and, I interviewed was lucky to sort of meet people like at some of the big cosmetics companies and learn a lot about perfume and things I was able to sort of bring into the show. But a lot of it was picking up over the many, many years I've been there, the attitudes of French people, having French friends, and sort of like finding the humor in the cultural differences, which I think was something that I really wanted to do in the first season of the show. And that's sort of, to me, what the show is so much about.
Um, Once the show is picked up, how do you plan your season? Is that do you start thinking, like, for example, I'm asking these questions like you and I haven't talked about this, but you've got season 2 of Emily in Paris coming up. How much, like, what's your process now and in going forward?
I'm starting to think about it. I think I like to have an end in mind if possible. With Sex and the City, the first
And
season.
for the whole series, or
No, not the whole series. A season. Like for me, Sex and the City was always going to have that sort of through line with Carrie and Mr. Big, this sort of continuing storyline, which is something in a way I guess I brought from the sort of serialized, storytelling I did on Melrose Place. I wanted to bring that into a comedy, and that there would be some standalone episodes, but there would also be like continuing storylines, certainly with Carrie and Mr. Big, and how that was going to play out over the first season was something that was, very planned and structured. But I don't have a game plan for 2 or 3 or 4 seasons of a show. I mean, I have a game plan for, the season that I'm doing and some ideas for another season, but I do feel like the characters start to tell you where where the story's going, and it's really important to sort of see how the chemistry with the cast works and sort of the actors you've hired and what they can do. And I think watching actors perform your material also just inspires you as a writer to say, wow, they're so good. I want to know more about them. I want to see them more. I want to like dive in and you see what they can do as an actor, and you just want to be able to like give them more material. So I think that also drives some of the storytelling.
were the French actors at all, did they speak up, and did they have like little things that they were contributing to the script because they were French, or not really?
I think not so much, not really. There might be like some words here and there. But there would be times when I would say, okay, guys, this is going to be said in French, and here's how we did our rough translation, but now you do yours,
Right.
And they'd look at our translation and laugh, and then basically go and sort of do their version of it. And I think that was always really important for me to have a French cast that I was leaning on and saying, okay, does this sound true? Does this sound right? And so they were like real partners in that respect.
Like the real sounding board. One thing that I have wanted to ask you about Younger is that book came out in 2005. How the hell did you get your hands on that book?
I found it a while ago, but it was being developed somewhere else. So it wasn't available the first time I found it. And then it came around and somebody said, oh, the book's available. But it wasn't about millennial culture. And I think that for me was what made it like, was what I was able to really bring to it and make it about something more, something more than just a woman kind of pretending to be younger in the workplace. I think the kind of the just trying to understand the idea that like millennials have, especially then, so much more currency than ever, than more than just being young. They understood, they were fluent in social media and all these things that she wasn't. And that generation gap was just so much bigger because of that. And I think that just added so much to the show for me.
Did you worry at all that you weren't going to be able to sustain the premise? Because it does feel like it could have been a perfect movie. Was it developed as a movie or a series?
No, it was always developed as a series. I had faith in the idea that if I created a strong enough cast of characters and fleshed out the ensemble, that it was going to, that at any point we could move beyond the premise of the show.
Yeah.
It actually lasted a lot longer than I thought. The
did.
actual premise lasted, we were able to, like, it just organically lasted much, much longer than I thought it would or could. But we were always having so much fun with the lie, and she was able to keep it going and sort of parse it out enough so that certain people knew and certain people didn't, which also worked for us in a lot of ways. That it really kind of, I think the last person to find out was, Diana in season 6. So it really stayed, that the premise of the show stayed alive even longer than I imagined it would, but not for all the characters.
This is just a question to somebody who's done this for so long, is how do you stay engaged and interested in just continuing to do it?
Um, I think it's just about like, if I ever take any extended period of time off, I'm bored, and I want to get back to work. And it's as hard as it is. I'm happier working than not working, and also you get sort of like, you sort of have an idea or something that sort of like sticks with you, in the way that Emily in Paris was in my head. I didn't have it fully figured out for a long time, but it stuck with me as something I thought, oh, I'm gonna like have to figure out how to write this pilot one way or another, just to get it off my chest, just to say, all right, well, I tried it.
That idea
It either worked, or it didn't work.
Years.
Yeah.
I'm going to take some questions now. I've got them on my phone. This is from Dana. What makes you sit up and pay attention when reading a writer's sample?
I think some sharp dialogue, smart dialogues, a surprising turn in the story, anything emotional that comes through in a script, anything that, anytime I read something that makes me feel something, to me, that's gold for me, is when I read a script that has some, like, where I emotion, in terms of it makes me feel something. I'm either like, certainly laughing, is great, but even more just like kind of, starting to feel something for the characters.
That was also something that I noticed, because I did a Darren Star festival yesterday, because I also watched some Sex in the City, but just over the course of that first season, it got more and more, you felt more in that show. And I felt like the more you got into the emotion of it, the stronger the show was and the more it took off. Next question from Michael. Can you talk about your pitch process and how that's changed? Pitching from IP versus creating a new show.
I don't know that it's changed that much. I think, in terms of, I think it's always easier to pitch from IP. I think the powers that be always love to see that there's a book or something. I think it just makes them like feel like, oh, there's something there. It's not just coming out of someone's head. And that, so I like that. I actually like books and I like IP, because I feel like for me, there's something there. I even if it's something that just sort of like is it's thematic, I'm able to basically say, all right, here is the idea that it's been executed this way, and here's why there's themes in here that can work, and that there is something to say. There's something more to grab onto. And I think, I hate pitching. It's like my least favorite thing. I'd almost rather just write something than have to pitch it.
I hear an echo. All right, question from Lynn. Do you have any advice for writers who love and want to write in the teen drama genre?
I would just say, know your characters. It's something that I like personally. I would never write a teen drama right now. I mean, when I wrote 90210, I was young enough to understand what teenagers were like. And I was very aware that those shows up to that point had been written by much older people. And I think having 10 years of less than 10 years of distance from being a teenager helped me write those characters authentically. So I would say, if you can write something authentically, whether it's a teen drama or anything, it's just about writing characters authentically and having a point of view on it, and something to, a way to express the lives of those characters in a way that feels real.
There's another question, but there's only dots from Crescent. Once your show is in its second season, what is your approach and process?
Trying to think about what worked the first season, what didn't work the first season, building on the success of the first year, trying to deepen the show, and course correct in some cases. I mean, I think it's a great opportunity to have a second season of a show, because I think it's like a chance to make the show better. And I think the first season is always like a bumpy road for any show. I mean, there's very few shows that pull off like just, an amazing first season. I think second seasons of my shows, I always feel like the second season gets better than the first season, for me at least.
Yeah, because you're fleshing it out. Do you read reviews and media?
I would honestly say, yes, I'm guilty of reading reviews. I do. I always think I'm not going to, and then like I do. And I feel like sometimes it's kind of, it doesn't really mean that much to the success of a show. I mean, I've had shows that have gotten great reviews and gotten canceled. So I look at some of the reviews of Sex and the City the first season, and they were horrible, and people didn't get it. And sometimes when you do something new, people don't like it. When they do something that people just haven't quite seen before, or it doesn't fit their idea of what a show should feel like or look like, or I think a lot of people were offended by Sex and the City the first season. I think there were a lot of male critics that were pretty misogynistic in terms of their reviews of the show, and brought a lot of their own prejudices to reviewing the show. So I think Emily in Paris is a great example. It had so many great reviews at the beginning in the American press, and then there were so many horrible reviews in the French press, and then there was a backlash, and then a backlash to the backlash of the reviews, and at some point, you just say, I give up, because it doesn't mean anything, and all that really means anything is the audience enjoying the show or not. That's the only thing that counts.
But psychologically, when you're doing Sex in the City and you don't get the good reviews, how do you go to work and kind of go, you know what? No, we're doing something that is good.
I don't take them to heart to that degree. I think about the good ones.
So this is from Michael. What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self? What do you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
I think just sort of trust the writing process, trust the process a little more, that it always gets done, or certainly as a lot of panic when I was younger about writing. And I don't know. I think that that would be just sort of like keep the faith in a way, because it all, things do tend to work out. Somehow the show always gets done, and I think when I was 25, I was just barely entering the business. So I don't know. I think I was also very lucky to have started so young. I wasn't really expecting to have a professional writing career at that age. I was definitely planning on being an assistant for a lot longer.
You said that you met a producer, but how did you meet your first producer?
I met my first producer because I was an assistant at at a PR firm, and the woman I worked for, very, very, very kindly, like, knew that I was a writer, and I wrote all of her clients' bios. I wrote all of our press releases and all the materials. So I did a lot of writing. That's one of the things I really like to do. I was terrible at actually pitching clients for stories. That wasn't what I was good at all. But she had friends that had a couple of friends that had a producing deal at Warner Brothers, and she sent them my material. And I had written some screenplays, and so they liked it, and they met with me, and they had an idea they wanted to develop, and I basically developed it with them and wrote the treatment, and that's sort of how it happened.
I'm going to go back and give that guy advice, which is, if you're 25 years old and you have to write those couple screenplays, because
Well, here is the advice I would say, is that the key to it for me was always writing. I'd written a screenplay in college, and a couple screenplays. And when I got the opportunity, when I pitched Doing Time on Planet Earth to Warner Brothers, they asked, do I have a writing sample, before they hired me to write it. And I did have a writing sample. I did have a screenplay I'd written, I had a screenplay. And I think that I was constantly writing in my 20s. I was taking extension classes at UCLA in screenwriting, even though I graduated from UCLA. I was writing spec half hours. I was working on screenplays, and I was like, not that was in my mind. I was always writing. So I think having the material, it was always really important in terms of getting that next job.
absolutely. I've heard so many stories about that weird entry through the PR person who knows somebody, but the common denominator between all the people who make it is the ones that have scripts. This is from Elizabeth. What is it like working on several shows simultaneously, and how do you make sure it has your touch?
It's not my favorite thing. I don't love doing it. It's sort of why I don't do it very often. I used to, and I didn't enjoy it, because I did feel like I was spread too thin. I like to kind of be pretty heavily involved in all aspects of production and writing, and I like to micromanage. And I feel like the shows that I've been successful with are the ones that I've written, and that I'm able to really kind of like be in the room with the writers and really spend a lot of attention to all of the scripts and all the stories and all of the cuts and everything like that. So I don't really like run a factory, and it's just not important for me to do that, because I think, to me, it's like one good show at a time is enough.
Yeah, I agree. It's so time consuming, and you want to have a life. You want to be able to live and experience
Yeah,
things.
I think it's important to have a life outside of writing. I mean, you need experiences. And I think that, to me, is like what, even writing this show, Emily in Paris, which is, I mean, making this show gave me the experience of living and working in Paris, which kind of gives me more material for the show down the line. And it's like the material comes from the experience. And I think it's important to have experiences in life, and you just can't get you can't get all of that just from like, being in LA and working and writing there all the time.
Right, and other whatever else you're watching.
Right.
Getting your
Sure.
input from that. 5-minute cue. I probably wasn't supposed to read that. All right. Did you write as a kid? Did you write your whole life?
I did. Yeah, I did write as a kid. I like to write. I like creative writing. I wrote a lot of stories, and I wrote plays and all sorts of things. And I was a bit of I wanted to be a writer when I was young. I wanted to really be a director, quite honestly. But I wrote a lot, and I took, I don't know, I took audited like a screenwriting class and university screenwriting class when I was in high school, and I just always liked to write.
You are.
I certainly enjoyed. I mean, like, it's weirdly more enjoyable when you're not getting paid for it. The minute it becomes a job, it becomes like a little less fun. But I did love to write as a kid.
Speaking of it becoming a job, really in the couple minutes we have left, how do you handle notes, network notes?
I don't mind notes if they're coming from an executive that I feel like understands the show that I'm doing, and in a way is a fan of the show. I feel like their notes can be really helpful because, look, they're smart. They want to make the show better, but mostly they're like an audience member. I mean, I think you have to consider or listen to every note. At some point, you have to think, well, is the network wanting this to be a different show than the show that I'm writing? And if that's the case, then the notes just aren't helpful. But if you guys are, if you're on the same page, if the network likes the show you're doing and understands the show you're doing, then their notes can be really helpful. And I think the notes that aren't helpful, and I've certainly gotten them working on network shows, is when the notes have been, have basically more words in them than the script. And that's happened to me. It's like, you're like, where did they find the time to write all these notes? It's like you get 20 pages notes, like there's a bigger word count in the notes than there is in the script. And then you just sort of think, well, this isn't working. And those shows have never worked when I've gotten, I'll call it ABC as a network that's given me the most ridiculous amount of notes on shows that basically tanked. I mean, the notes drove the shows into the ground. And having been through that experience a couple of times, I know it'll never happen to me again, because I wouldn't allow it to. But I've seen it happen, and it's such a waste of everybody's time and money when they just don't trust the creative people that they're paying, that they hired to do the show for them.
Let's see what I love how Netflix doesn't give notes. A lot of people thanking you, and I'm going to thank you now, because even though we're friends, and I will say my bit of advice to all the writers in the audience is, if you meet people you admire, tell them, because you will possibly be able to be friends with them afterwards. It worked in this case, but people do like to know that their work is appreciated, and they like compliments.
Thanks, Robin.
I'm a fan. I'm still a fan.
Thank you. And I'm a fan of yours. She's very funny, by the way. Very, very funny. Romy, Michelle's high school reunion, many, many shows. Great. And many other things.
Yay. All right. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Bye, Darren.
Bye.